So a lot of the times when there is a review for like anything, there is always someone upset. Whether because they don't agree with the review, which is perfectly fine, but also where they give, say, a game a 7 out of 10, saying that the game is actually really good, and then people go, you gave it a 7 out of 10, why do you hate it so much? And there seems to be somewhat of a misunderstanding here. Of course, I am not the reviewer. I am not the biggest critic in the world. Hell, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a critic in the same way people at IGN or Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes or GameSpot or wherever the fuck are. I am an individual who reviews games, to a lesser extent movies, and to an even lesser extent TV shows for the fun of it. Mainly because it is something fresh in my mind and I would like to talk about it and share my opinions with you guys. So in this video, I'm going to run down how I make reviews for mostly games, because that's mostly what I review, and most of the stuff that I do in my reviews for games also apply to movies and shows. But I will touch on those two for a little bit, but it will mostly be games. What the review process is almost, what I'm thinking when I'm reviewing them, how I come up with the scores, and specifically what the scores mean. Because the scores mean different things to different people, as I said earlier. So we're gonna get into this. Before we get started, you know what to do. Be sure to like this video, subscribe if you're new, turn notifications, and leave a comment, and you'll be a loyal subscriber. Part 1. My opinion. When making a review, some people don't quite understand that it is supposed to be your opinion. That should be obvious, but many people kind of forget that. If I play a game and I don't like it, but others do, I'm reviewing it based on my experience and my opinion. Look at my Cyberpunk review. A review I was sure was going to get some kickback, as I gave the game a 9 out of 10. And I know the game is buggy as fuck, especially on the PS4 and Xbox One. And I played it on the PS4. However, I was lucky when playing the game, as while I didn't have the completely polished version I wanted, the bugs I ran into weren't bad enough to ruin the game for me. At least the ones that really affected my enjoyment were few and far between. I received 4 crashes over the course of my first playthrough of the game, and while that should not ever happen even once, I've heard many people say their game crashed like 10 times before they finished the game, so 4 times by the end is pretty lucky. But keep in mind, when I give a game like Cyberpunk a 9 out of 10, I say the bugs didn't bother me that much. I'm not saying that everyone else is overreacting to these bugs, because this is definitely something CD Projekt Red shouldn't get away with. This sort of just turned into a bit of a rant about Cyberpunk, but the point here is that my review was explaining my experience with Cyberpunk and how it wasn't that bad at all for me, thus giving it a 9 out of 10. That is a review. You give your own opinion. Part 2. Considering things. What do I mean by considering things? Well, what I mean by that is to know what to expect with a game when you play it. Let's use Ghost of Tsushima for example. Ghost of Tsushima is a AAA $60 open-world story-driven PS4 exclusive developed by Sucker Punch, who are really good. Naturally, I am expecting a game that'll be worth $60, and a game that'll keep me busy and invested to play all the way through it, and then some, and have the game be long enough to justify a $60 price tag. And I am happy to see that Ghost of Tsushima exceeded those expectations, as it checked off all those things and then some. Now let's look at another game I reviewed, but got a few people disagreeing with me on, and that is Mega Man 11 from a few years ago. This game is not as ambitious. This is not a big AAA $60 open world story-driven content-filled experience, but rather a $30 side-scrolling Mega Man game that you can probably beat in like 3 or 4 hours. However, here's the catch. It's $30. Therefore, I review it like a $30 game. It's a Mega Man game, which already means it isn't trying to change the world. So you take that into account. Now here is another game from that same year, which is sort of the same deal but different. I'll explain. Kirby Star Allies was, as far as I remember, Nintendo's first big game of that year, and they sold it for $60. However, while I thoroughly enjoyed the game, Kirby Star Allies is very short and should not be $60. In fact, it's probably a $40 game at most. Therefore, I am considering that when reviewing the game, as I spent $60 on a game worth no more than 40, maybe even 30. That doesn't mean it's not a fun game. What I am saying in the review is that it either shouldn't be that short or shouldn't be $60. And again, a game like Mega Man 11 or Streets of Rage 4, another game where this is the case, can get away with being that short because they are $20 to $30. Part 3, the review score. Many people don't get review scores, and I understand. Many people feel that when you explain what you like or didn't like about a game, you can sorta come up with your own review score when listening to what the reviewer has to say. Other people feel that a number, say like a 7 out of 10, while you might think a 7 out of 10 is really good, others will be like, what the fuck, why do you hate this so much? So let me explain. These review scores are not only for you to understand what I think about the game, but also to help me wager how much I actually like the game myself, at least when I review the game. That being said, let's look at each number, each score. A 0 out of 10 means that there's literally nothing good about this game. Like, a game should get a 0 out of 10 if it doesn't even work, if it doesn't even turn on. A 1 out of 10 is pretty much the worst a game can be while, you know, still turning on. A 2 out of 10 is slightly better but still atrocious. A 3 out of 10 is terrible. A 4 out of 10 is bad or really bad. A 5 out of 10 I'd say is not good to mediocre. A 6 out of 10 is just above average. Not the best, but at least you can say it's not bad. A 7 out of 10, I'd say, is really good. A game that has many flaws, but you can possibly get your money's worth. An 8 out of 10 is where it starts to get great and definitely worth your time. A 9 out of 10 is a game that is near perfect, but has 1 or 2 big things that, while don't ruin the game at all, keeps it from a perfect score. And a 10 out of 10 is, while nothing is actually perfect, at least the closest thing to perfect. Maybe having some minor flaws that aren't even worth mentioning. And I've never given anything an 11 out of 10, but if I ever do, that means that it is beyond perfection. Keep in mind though, the review score isn't the most important thing about a review, but rather the opinion. So remember that when going into any review, at least mine. Part 4, movies. Now, I mostly review games. However, I like to review movies too. And I don't want to dwell on movies too much because the stuff about my opinion, taking things into consideration, and review scores all mostly apply to movies. I did say mostly though, as when it comes to considering things, you are not buying movies for $60 and expecting to be watching it for the next few days. Movies are a one and done. So, what do you have to take into consideration here? Well, let's look at a movie like Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame, the 11-year build aside, is a big budget blockbuster by one of the biggest studios, being Disney, and you are just expecting to be wildly entertained by each second of this movie, and it exceeds those expectations. Now let's look at a movie like, say, The Old Guard, a movie that came out last year on Netflix, exclusive to Netflix, and therefore not a movie you go to the theater for, but a movie you sit at home and watch on your TV. And taking that into consideration, a movie like The Old Guard is definitely a movie that succeeds. However, then let's take a look at a movie from last year like Mulan, which I thought was terrible. However, you're thinking I should be easier on it because it was released on Disney+. But then you forget the fact that this is essentially a theatrical film not released in theaters. And also they charge you $30 for it on Disney Plus. So I review it like a theatrical film. And that makes it even more impressive when we see another movie like Pixar's Soul, which was also pretty much a theatrical movie, not in theaters, but it is still very good and could have worked very well in theaters, and also they didn't charge you $30. That's what you have to consider when reviewing movies. Part 5. TV shows. Now I review TV shows even less than movies. In fact, I only started reviewing shows like a year or two ago, and most of the stuff already listed do apply for TV as well. But you have to take into consideration more things here. A season of a TV show is like one long movie, except it's not. I hope that made sense. When I first started to review shows like Rick and Morty Season 4 or the first season of The Mandalorian, I reviewed each episode individually, but you should never do that. Wanna know why? Because then when each episode of a show that drops weekly drops, you go, okay, gotta watch this and review it. I stopped doing that, and because of that, I looked forward to every episode of the second season of The Mandalorian, and when it was time to review the whole season, I was quite excited to do that. Now, when it comes to scoring the seasons of the show, you have to consider your enjoyment of every episode. Look at the final season of The Clone Wars. It was 12 episodes long, the first 4 were alright, the middle 4 were lame, but the final 4 were phenomenal, and I would have loved to give the season a 10 out of 10 just because of those final 4 episodes. You have to take into account the other 8, and when you do that, the season isn't a 10 out of 10. That's how you review shows. Part 6. I mean, the video's over now. So, that's how I review games, movies, and shows. Hopefully you understand a little bit now. No one was really asking me to make this video, but I wanted to because I thought it was a very interesting thing. Anyways, what do you guys think? Be sure to like this video, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.